Welcome to the Improv Tunes. Today we're going to talk about mapping. Mapping is a skill you can use in improv sets, and it's really for advanced players, and when skillfully done, it can be one of the most impressive things about your whole show. So let's get into it, and let's welcome those rainbow players.
Let's welcome the rainbow players and let's talk about mapping. Mapping is taking the recognizable milestones of a previous narrative and placing them in another narrative or context. So, for an example, let's take the movie Star Wars, the popular movie Star Wars. In Star Wars, there's a bunch of milestones, there's a bunch of touchstones that give it its identity as a sci-fi movie, but also as Star Wars, its own identity as a narrative. I'm just going to pull three elements out. The first one being there's the Force. The concept of the Force is unique to Star Wars, right? That's a milestone. There's also the concept of Chewbacca being like the sidekick, the furry sidekick that's really helpful and everything. That's the second milestone, touchstone. And the third one can be like Darth Vader, right? So Darth Vader is another touchstone or milestone in Star Wars. That's what gives it its identity as a sci-fi movie, but also its identity as Star Wars itself, as an individual, unique narrative. Now let's take that narrative that we're aware of and let's move it over into another context or narrative. We're going to turn it into a slapstick comedy, right? So in this slapstick comedy, we're going to call it Spaceballs, okay? And in Spaceballs, instead of the Force, we have something called the Schwartz. But what makes us recognize that milestone is because it was a milestone over in Star Wars. They had the Force. It operates the same way. It's a parody of it, but it's also a milestone. So then let's talk about Chewbacca. Instead of Chewbacca, we have Barf, played by John Candy, right? Furry, sidekicky kind of person. And instead of Darth Vader, we have Lord Darth Helmet. So you can say, like, is it parody satire? We're going to talk about this because it's different than satire. But these are touchstones that then get translated into another narrative or another context, and you've now mapped the concept of Star Wars over into a slapstick comedy. But it's because it's recognizable from these previous touchstones. There's three ways, and this is why it's a little different than parody. There's three ways that mapping can be done, and they only differentiate in the resource material. So let's go over the first of the three ways. The first way is, let's say Orange and Blue come out, okay? And Orange and Blue are going to do a scene in front of the audience. This happens a lot in formats like The Herald, right? Where you're going to repeat scenes, or you're going to explore scenes even further. So Orange and Blue step out, and they're going to do a scene about beekeepers. And in this scene, a lot of stuff happens, but some milestones that just we're going to use for an example is that Blue gets stung and Orange laughs. Okay, that happens. A second milestone that happens is then all of a sudden Orange is running around the stage and she's yelling, bees, 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 okay? And then the third milestone is Blue and Orange run and a bunch of bees chase after them, okay? So there's the three milestones that happen, okay? Now the audience saw that happen. Like in a Herald, this was the first beat, right? The audience saw that scene happen. So now later on in the show, we're going to map that scene over into another situation. Instead of being beekeepers, they're going to be two tourists in London trying to figure out the tube, right? They're going to map, and sometimes this happens unintentionally, but a lot of times, especially in this sort of format, it does happen intentionally. So they're two tourists and they're trying to figure out the London tube. They have to use the milestones that they used before in the previous scene. So instead of being stung, maybe Blue gets her finger pinched in the doorway, ouch, and then Orange laughs. That's a milestone from the first scene. Instead of yelling bees when Orange is running around, there's like there's trains coming, and Orange is running on the stage, train, because that was a milestone in the first one. And then they have to end the scene like in the first time they did it by running away and being chased by bees, but in this case it would be subway trains. The runaway being chased by subway trains. Now that's mapping. They've taken a narrative that the audience was there for the generation of the narrative. It's a brand new, unique narrative created that night, and they've mapped it over another context, okay? It works well because the audience loves what's familiar. The audience loves, like, I was there when that was created, and now they've made sense of it, okay? So that's one way of mapping. That's one version of mapping. The second version is you don't do the scene ahead of time, but you take a very popular story, a story that everyone knows. So for example, let's take Star Wars, right? So you don't talk about it ahead of time. A lot of times this happens organically in the moment, but then they start mapping over these concepts that everyone kind of knows the movie of Star Wars. And so people start talking about, oh, there's a magical mystical force. Oh yeah, okay. And then maybe someone comes in and they have that, because these are milestones. So if we have red and pink and they're coming in, they're doing this, that red comes in and lightsaber pops up, but they call it something else. And pink starts using the force and manipulating like the chairs in the background and everything like that. But they're using milestones from a popular narrative that already exists. The audience didn't have to be there for the creation of it because they walked into the space already having that knowledge hopefully, right? So that's the second way of doing it, is already taking a pre-existing narrative. The third way is to bring in a pre-existing social script, which is different. Like, we've been talking about narratives, which are actually like stories, beginning, middle, and end. They have characters and everything. But the third way to do it is to do like a social script or a shared experience, right? So let's say that purple and green come on stage, and they take a well-known social script. Let's say buying coffee at Starbucks, right? They're going to take that well-known social script and they're going to map it over another example. So the example is purple is the professor and green just wants to get the grades, wants to find out what her grade is. So they take the concept of Starbucks is that maybe when green says, "Can I have my paper back?" Purple's like, "Yeah." Purple has to go back and create the test, like does the machine like an espresso machine, and then comes back and like has to shout out the name, like, is Brenda here? Brenda? And maybe another student comes and takes that test out of nowhere. And the next test prepared is like Marcia, and then green steps in and goes, it's Marcia, because that's like, so those are milestones in getting a Starbucks coffee, is that the person has to prepare your coffee. So purple steps back and prepares the test and does like all that machinery work. The second thing is having to call someone's name for it when their order is ready. And the third one is having the wrong name spelled on the coffee cup. Like, those are milestones that occur not from a narrative, not from a story, not from a story that was created right there in the moment, but from a shared social experience, right? Now, the only thing that really delineates these three examples is where the source material is. For the first one, the source material is created there in the moment in the audience, and then they just mapped it over another scene later on in the set. The second one was a popular narrative that already exists, and the third one is a shared social script or social experience. Now, this is one of the most powerful ones. This is how you can metaphorically talk about really tough situations going on in the world, like immigration policy or politics or stuff like that, and you can bring those same elements over, map them onto a different context or a different narrative. And what's really neat about this is then what you're doing is you're exploring the specific arguments as opposed to the actual subject matter. And then people can look at the arguments in a different light, and they can even go, wow, that's really dumb the way that's set up. Or maybe that has a different way of looking at it. And it allows people to have a common ground, which is how you convince people. Is first you convince people of common ground, and then you stretch their boundaries beyond that. And you say, this is what this argument looks like in a different context. And if you do this in an improv show, it's a very powerful tool, and it's very interesting. It's very neat. It's very engaging. That is the concept of mapping. Please let me know if you have any questions. I will try to help out as best I can in the comments. See you later.
And that was the concept of mapping in improv. Mapping is a wonderful skill to bring your improv team show to the next level, where you're not just telling the superficial narrative. There's actually an underlying current of social analysis in your improv show, which is really neat to see. Please like, comment, and share. I'm really excited about all the people from around the world that I've been meeting with the IMPROVTOONS. I'm open to meeting even and more. There'll be a couple announcements. There's going to be 2 big announcements coming up with the Improv Boost. I will be announcing them in the next couple weeks, so stay tuned. Keep your eye out, your ear out, your nose out, all of your 5 senses. Keep them out. Thank you.